A very warm welcome to everyone to the third session of International Research Seminar Series 2021, organized by Flame University. My name is Chetna Moka, and I am associated with Flame School of Communication as an assistant professor in the area of advertising and branding, and I'll be moderating the session today. With me, I have Dr. Preeta Menon, who is the head of the Department Media and Journalism at Flame School of Communication and one of the key people behind the ideation of this research series. As few of us may be attending this session, session of the series for the first time, may I request Dr. Menon to share the idea of this endeavor and before we go into the session, today's session.
Thank you, Professor Chetna. A very warm welcome to all those present here today for the third session of the International Seminar Series, which is on impactful qualitative research. We have with us Professor Russell Belk today, and I'm here primarily to tell you a little bit more about the purpose of this endeavor. When we thought about the International Research Seminar Series, it was frankly to bring together early career researchers and scholars across India to a platform that will expose them to quality research. So impactful and quality research is what we are looking at. We have lined up a series of talks over a period of 6 months. So the series has been running from July and will run right through December 2021, which is a 6-month period. And in this period, we have lined up stalwarts, legends, and names that you've always been citing and quoting in your papers, which will give you exposure to the kind of good work. And also access. So many of the scholars who have come here have been associated with Indian researchers and have kindly offered to help whenever possible and however possible. And this effort itself, coming in today and addressing all of you, is one such step towards that effort to raise the bar of quality research from researchers in India. We have in this seminar series 3 themes that we would be, bucketing all the talks on. The first theme is contemporary issues in marketing and communications. The second theme is in methods, research methods in communication and marketing. And the third is industry-led research. So today, while we have Professor Belk here talking to us on research methods and qualitative research as a research method, we've also had speakers in the past who have come to us on all 3 topics. Going further too, we have planned to have both talks as well as workshops. This month in August, towards the end of August, on August 28th, we plan to conduct a workshop, which is a writing workshop. So for all of you out there who have, papers that have been in the back burner or have been in your inboxes for too long, you can bring them out, and over a period of the workshop, you should be able to, draft it into a much publication-ready state, hopefully. That's our endeavor. I think that's all that I want to tell you about. While we have Professor Belk today, we've already had editors of journals, A and A-star journals in the past, editors, and we are also lining up editors, associate editors, area editors, who will be able to throw light on what is it that journals look at and how can we up our game in not only conducting research, but in publishing it and disseminating the information that we create, here in India. Over to you, Ching.
Thank you, Dr. Preeta. It was quite an interesting and, information, and congratulations for those efforts. They're bearing fruits for us now. So thank you so much. Moving on to the topic of today's session, which is impactful qualitative research. The topic is highly relevant to this gathering and particularly to the scholars and practitioners in the area of marketing and communications. And One of the journal papers published in 2017 in the Journal of Advertising, titled as Qualitative Research in Advertising, aptly summarizes, and I quote, the need of qualitative advertising research more than ever. So in today's world with abundance of data and ample legit sources to collect it, usually in the quantitative nature, understanding and incorporation of cultural aspects and subjectivity is indispensable. So to enlighten us on this topic, we have with us the author of this paper and many such remarkable body of knowledge, Dr. Russell Belk. Dr. Belk is a well-known name in the academic community. I'm sure most of us would have referred to his scholarly work to give structure and framework to our academic thoughts and ideas. But as customary to this gathering, allow me to formally introduce Dr. Belk here. Dr. Russell Belk holds a PhD from University of Minnesota, USA. Currently, he is with York University. He's a distinguished research professor and Kraft Foods Canada chair in marketing at Schulich School of Business, which is in Canada. He's past president of International Association of Marketing and Development. He's also fellow, a past president, and film festival co-founder in the Association of Consumer Research. He's also co-initiated the Consumer Behavior Odyssey and the Consumer Cultural Theory Conference. He's received the Paul D. Converse Award, 2 Fulbright Fellowships, and Sheth Foundation Journal of Consumer Research Award for long-term contribution to the consumer research. Dr. Belk has published across approximately 650 publications, and in the last one decade, which is starting 2010, he's published 20 papers and books every year. His research tends to be qualitative, visual, conceptual, and cultural. It involves the extended self, meanings of possessions, collecting, gift giving, sharing, digital consumption, and materialism. On behalf of Flame University and this gathering, I extend a very warm welcome to you, sir. It is such an honor to have you with us here today. Thank you so much for accepting this.
Thank you very much for that nice introduction. I'm pleased to be here, and as you can see by the background, it's as if I'm talking to a class of you. Next time I will try to come in person. I understand you have a lovely campus. But if I can begin my presentation, the background here is one that we're not going to have much longer. This is a two-wheeler or a four-wheeler for that matter, speedometer and tachometer, and we're going electric. And so these are the sorts of changes that we need to think about and to begin to look to as we do research. So now it's moving. It was supposed to be a graphic that moved. But here's a preview of the presentation. 2 parts. First, 4 cases, and then 4 issues and techniques to have a look at. So the cases, the first 3 are in India, involving Gillette razors, cell phones in India, their impact, sensory preferences by class, and another one in Africa called Leaping Luxuries in Africa. And I have sent the papers that are behind some of the things I'll be talking about today. I don't know if they've been distributed to you yet. If not, I think they will be available. So to begin with the first case, let me just go back. I guess I forgot to say that issues and techniques that we'll get to. We'll take a break between these 2 parts, and we'll have a little class exercise and then open for questions. And then we'll go through these issues and techniques: Netanography, videography, cell phone aided research, and voice-driven digital assistance. And then at the end, time allowing, we'll have some further questions. So to begin with the Gillette case, Gillette is an old company.
If I may interrupt, I'm really sorry. For my audience, just make sure you put the questions while you are attending the session. So as sir said, we'll be taking a break and I'll be taking up the questions. Request you to put your credentials so that I can acknowledge your contribution to the session. And feel free to tag us if you wish to share anything about us on social media. Thank you, sir. And over to you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thanks again. So Gillette is an old company, 150 years old. In the US, it has a dominant market share. And it sells the Gillette Fusion Pro Glide for, well, it gives away the razors, but the blades cost $4 each. And they had a rather tiny market share in India, and they decided that they needed to have a lower price point. And so they did some engineering and came up with a lower priced razor. And they tested it with Indian men going to Columbia University. And these Indian men said, it's a great razor. They took it to India and it was a big flop. And so they did a little bit more research, and they found that while the Columbia doctoral students or graduate students, like American shavers, shaved before a sink with hot and cold running water, whereas the poor in India and the lower middle class that they were targeting often shaved with a handheld mirror outside or inside with bad light. They didn't shave every day. They used 100-year-old technology where you unscrew the handle and then drop a blade in and then screw it back in. And they got lots of nicks and cuts as a result. So they decided they had to come in with some qualitative research. They brought in an ethnographic research team to do depth interviews, observations, shop-alongs where you talk to people as you're shopping with them, in-home visits and test shaves. And as a result of that work and some development in India, they developed Gillette Guard that cost only about 3% of the Fusion Pro Glide. And you can see a picture on the right. It's very simple, few moving parts, large safety comb, easy to clean without running water. And these prices have gone up since, but it initially sold for 15 rupees with blade replacements being 1 rupee. And the result was an incredible 50% market share within 60 months. Now that also has changed. That's gone down in this case, thanks to more competition. But it's nevertheless a success. It's an India-centric innovation. They recognized they had to go through a lot of small-scale retailers. They used ads with Indian actors and actresses. And they have since rolled out the product to China and Africa. And they're targeting to bring it back to North America in order to safeguard people undercutting them or coming in with disruptive innovations. So it's been a very successful product. Second case, cell phones in Indian village. This is from an ethnography and a book by Sherpa Tenhunen, sorry. They looked at the introduction and the social change that this product brought to a village. This was a village in West Bengal, Janta, only about 2,500 people. A lot of them commuted to Vishnupur, which is about 12 kilometers away, had good roads, but few cars and few tractors, pretty good literacy. And before cell phones, women marrying into the village wrote to relatives and letters, or they traveled to Vishnupur to make telephone calls. But this is Chinese technology coming in, inexpensive phones available to the masses. And it's an interesting case because in Janta, mobile phones, electricity, and television all came at once. It's not like these were a sequence of innovations that came in. As you can appreciate, the Indian teledensity since the early 90s has skyrocketed so that phones and increasingly smartphones are available to most people, the majority of people, including the majority of people in Janta. Now, the methods, as I mentioned, no, I guess I mentioned it for Gillette, the methods in this case for observation, depth interviews, some surveys, and Tenhunen had people keep phone diaries. What did you use your phone for? And as I mentioned, low-cost Chinese smartphones meant even low-income people could afford them, if not many minutes. And I guess I should say that it's not the case that everyone has a cell phone, but most people in places where you wouldn't expect it. So sadhus in some cases having smartphones as well. So some changes. Political campaigning became possible by by phone, and BJP and other parties used it, Modi's party. And the impacts on different groups in society were different according to intersectional groups. Now, that's not just to say that they're defined on age, but age and gender and marital status, a number of other things. So contrary to normal status hierarchy is patriarchal. In this case, young wives and children may be the experts in smartphone use, and college-educated men and women use the phones independently. Less educated workers, that in some cases were illiterate and innumerate in Roman numbers, needed help, and so people would sell them their services, downloading ringtones and movies for them. So in this case, education and wealth were more important than class and gender, increasingly the case throughout India. And small-scale businesses, from ganja sellers to chicken farmers, all benefited. And so they could do things like call and get the agricultural prices to sell their produce at a better price. Stay in touch with relatives, that reduced the number of visitors back home. Medical care became more accessible, but it was still 12 kilometers away in Vishnupur. However, they could call and make appointments and make sure they were going to be able to be seen. So as might be expected, and as occurred earlier with other technologies, wealthier entrepreneurs and larger farmers benefited more than laborers and low-income people. Ichupal was another case like that. But a broad sector of society benefited. Women became more connected and more empowered. And one of the unanticipated events was that there were more love marriages. Women had more voice in marital negotiations as well. So in this third case, this is JCR paper, Journal of Consumer Research, under review with Tanuka Ghoshal. We began the research at Indian School of Business. She and a partner of hers who started early on in this research, Rishti Batra, have since moved to the US. But we did this in 4 Indian cities. And so they initially observed, Rishti and Tanuka, that lower class Indians, poorer Indians, tended to prefer brighter, shinier clothes like those on the left here, whereas upper middle class and upper class Indians tended to prefer more somber patterns, not necessarily devoid of color, but like those on the right that are more restrained. And so they were interested in how that plays out. They were interested not just in the visual clothing in homes, and so the research was done in homes, but also the auditory, how loud these things were, the olfactory, what sort of perfumes and colognes they put on, gustatory, the spiciness and sweetness of drinks and food, and tactile, how smooth versus rough were their fabrics and furnishings. And so with the observation, they split into 2 groups. I began doing the research with them early on, but I had to come back to Canada. So they did the bulk of it in India. High and low cultural capital, just high and low social class, if you will, began in Hyderabad and Delhi, specifically Chandigarh, and some clever sorts of data collection techniques. One was dress up Lakshmi. And so they had a little paper doll, Lakshmi, and they had some clothes that you could dress her on. And they said, this is so-and-so, she's of approximately your age and background. Please dress her up using these photos for, first of all, a wedding, and then for an office party, and then for some other casual occasions. They also measured the decibel level of their phones, their tones, their ringtones, that's what I'm trying to say, and televisions with an app that they had on their smartphones to be able to hold up to the television or their phones and get it. They also examined the amount of sugar and milk that they put in their tea, and they brought along some fragrance preferences that were safeguarded in little Q-sticks that they could pull out to see which ones were preferred. And as expected, lower class preferred clothing with embellishments and flair, especially for their children, higher decibel level televisions and phone ringtones, stronger local perfumes versus global perfumes, and spicier foods and more sugary drinks. Whereas the high cultural capital people preferred clothing with light colors and straight cuts, moderate decibel levels on their devices, subtle brand name perfumes rather than bright, strong floral scents, and moderate tastes in food and drink, less spicy, less sugary. So they initially interpreted this because they were trained as experimental psychologists in terms of some work that they had done with self-esteem. And they thought low class people had lower self-esteem and they were compensating for it with these stronger stimuli. Well, it turned out in the research in the homes, that wasn't the case at all, that lower class people had high self-esteem and they knew what higher class people preferred, but that was not for them. They wanted their children to stand out. They wanted to be able to enjoy these sensory things. So our interpretation, at least for now, we'll see what the reviewers say, has to do with history of manners. Manners developed in India as well as in Europe with a gradual refinement, not just eating with hands, but eating with utensils, not just sitting on the ground, but sitting on chairs, not just eating from long plates, but eating from separate individualized plates and so forth. Sorry. And so our thought was that manners, refinement, if you will, is unnatural. It's something that must be learned and acquired, whereas taste for brighter, louder, sugary things it is innate. And so it's the upper middle class people who are behaving unnaturally here, not the lower class. There's a little bit more to it than that, but that's the gist of the interpretation. The third paper is from a paper by Rana Sob and I in Marketing Theory called On Pursuing Original Consumer Culture Theory. The foretitle, No Assemblage Required, is meant to be a play on words because assemblage theory is one theoretical perspective. But we're saying rather than bringing these a priori theories to bear, why don't you develop your own theory? And so the context that we're looking at, we're borrowing from a book, in this case by Sasha Newell, and some ethnographic research that he did in Côte d'Ivoire in Africa. And these were actually a fold over photo on the cover of the book. These are just three men that he looked at. These were late teens and early 20s. They tended to have conspicuous consumption of Western brand name clothing. But at the same time, they had no regular jobs. They were rather petty thieves. They would do things like steal someone's cell phone and then sell it to someone else, and then dress as police people and come back and confiscate the phone saying it was stolen, and then go around and sell it to someone else. And this, we'll get to it in just a moment, but this is tied to a dance called the Dance of the Logos, or the Lagobis, as you can see in the top visual here. So we'll get to what that is and how it ties into the clothing in this case. I call this the third case. It's actually the fourth case. So this is something where they were doing a bluff. And if I may, let me just read this to you. They were at an open air informal bar one evening, celebrating a successful forgery scam by, quote unquote, wasting the table, spending their earnings lavishly and extravagantly on beer and food, flashing their rolls of cash. They insisted that the waitresses leave all of the beer bottles on the table so others could see how much they had consumed. The women were dressed in African wax print material cut in body-hugging European fashion, while the men wore US and European brand name clothing, Nike, Adidas, Fashion Nova, Fubu, Docksiders, Hilfiger. Almost everyone had a cell phone displayed prominently, the rolls of money being flashed and spent, the prominently labeled clothes, the expensive drinks and cell phones were all part of an elaborate performance of success and modern citizenship that was disconnected from the economic reality of the performers. While to all appearances the crowd was living the good life, many of those present that night would struggle to find enough money to feed themselves the next day. And so in other words, they were bluffing. And so what is this all about? Why would people spend the little amount of money they have, blowing it, if you will, on this celebration? Well, there's something similar that happens in other places, not just in Africa, but in Asia, South America as well. And it's in the cases like you see with these men, they're called the flaneur. These are men from the Congo. It's a little bit more upper class and a little bit older than the people that we're looking at, but the same premise, spending all of their money on a wardrobe of fashionable clothes that would actually go to Paris to buy some of these. And let me just show you a video of something that is like the logo that they did celebrating this. Well, let me read you this description first. This is a description of the logo by one of the participants. He said, there's many moves to show the clothing. Turning the hat around is to show the label. The same is done with the shirt collar. The move of the lagobi where one lifts up the foot is done to show off the shoes. And then pulling the collar open and gesturing with the other hand to the chest, you show off your sami or chain, and gesture as if to say that it is gold. The movements with the wrists are to show off the watch and bracelets. Turning the head to one side and making subtle chin movements like snobbery is meant to say that the other is worthless. And so one person may start dancing and then another will get up and signify that the other that was originally dancing is a bluffeur, that he is nothing, and that the dancer will then mise en valeur everything that he himself is wearing. So with that description of the local lagobi, here's something comparable in the Congo.
Choose what you do.
Sir, I think we're missing the audio, so you might have to just narrate the ad for our audience.
So you're not seeing them?
We're able to see the video, but the audio, we're not able to hear anything. So.
Let me try a new sharing here and see if I can fix that.
Sure.
Sorry for that.
Professor, when you're clicking on share, there would be an icon on the top that says share sound. Just make sure that you click on that.
Yes, that's what I went back and did. So let's see if it works this time. Sorry, I've got to. There we go. So let's try this. Oops, still not letting me do it. Are you able to see that now?
Yes, we are able to see the screen. Yeah, the video.
Okay.
Screen.
No. Now it's frozen. Okay, there.
In life, you cannot always.
Somehow this has become a mechanical thing. Let me just take it through in stages.
Always choose what you can. Choose who you.
Now they're doing a dance.
You see my conflict. I'm the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul.
Okay, so sorry for that. I think the next one, I've got a couple of other clips should work okay. At any rate, that was a Guinness beer ad, but they were doing this dance to an audience at a local pub, and each one would get up and show off what they had. They were sort of putting down the other people, as in the lagobi. Now, Newell was trying to make sense of this as well. And he thought back and thought, hey, this is similar to a local tradition. These men, after they're initiated, come back from the forest and they start dancing around like this man on the right in a costume, pretending to be one of the spirits of the forest or the spirits of the ancestors. And the audience knew that this was their brother or their cousin or their uncle, but it was an open secret that no one's said this is really so-and-so that is in this costume. And the mask wearer himself actually felt that they became the spirit of the mask. This was spirit possession in a sense. And so what Newell said was that the same thing is happening in this case with the bluff of modernity, that they even call themselves bluffeurs, and they're wearing these expensive clothes far out of their price range by any normal sober accounting. And they're doing it as a mask, a bluff of modernity. It's a smokescreen of illusory wealth. And they have the connoisseurship, the taste, the knowledge to be modern. They only lack the money. And so the mask is an authentic, if wishful and anticipatory, expression of self. The mask in this case being the Western clothing that they were wearing. So an original theoretical interpretation based on starting analogy and this idea of open secrets applying in both cases, Newell developed a very interesting interpretation. So in thinking about how does this apply in other contexts, well, we already saw some African and Asian and South American contexts where it applied. We then look for other contexts, other Lagobis or the equivalent of Lagobis. And here is one in the West. This is from a film called American Psycho. And I think this will play audio and video this time, fingers crossed.
So much for looking after Courtney. Dorcia, how impressive. How on earth did you get a reservation there?
Lucky, I guess.
That's a wonderful suit. Don't tell me, let me guess. Valentino Couture.
Uh-huh.
That's frozen for some reason as well. I'll tell you what I'm going to do is skip that and let's go back to where we were here. And let's just go on without that. At any rate, what happens in the film is that each of these men pulls out their business card and talks about the elegant paper on which it's printed and the elegant typescript that is being used. And then the next one pulls it out, their business card, and has an even more elegant one. It's a really silly scene of status competition using business cards in this corporate office place. And so what the film suggests is that these men in a position of power and authority, nevertheless, are trying to outcompete one another on a sort of trivial basis of who has the most elegant business card. So the Lagobi applies more broadly than just in these contexts that we looked at. So next paper that we'll get to is qualitative research and advertising. And I want to just do the first part of this as an exercise. And so this is an advertisement, and from a magazine, could be online as well. And I've blocked out the name of the brand. And so what I'd like you to do is to think about and tell me, and you can just unmute yourselves and announce what you think is the case, what kind of product this might be for, and whether you think this is a high-end product, medium product, or a low-end product. So any guesses that you have, there's no right or wrong answers here. Just tell me what you think. You don't have to raise your hand.
I think we'll have to rely on the question and answer box. So you can put your response in the question answer box.
Okay. So please do that.
So there are two answers already. It's one. It says high-end men's suiting or premium shoes, suitings and shirtings, a swimsuit, high-end product, Emporio Armani. Already saw the brands. I think somebody wants to skip that.
Okay, well, that's enough. I can see we're getting some consistency here that this is a high-end brand, and you're quite right that this, if I can do it, is Hugo Boss, and so they are selling things like men's shoes and suits and so forth. But my question to you now, and again, if you can put this in the chat box. How did you come to that determination? What is it that told you that this was a high-end product rather than a low-end product? What sorts of cues in the ad did you pick up on? And so let's see if we've got some responses here. The lady, something about the lady, they're very well dressed. High-end brand for both swimsuit and men's clothing, the woman model from the lifestyle shown. Tell me more. What about the lifestyle, for instance? Body language, that's good. Body language.
Yeah, the alpha male presentation of the male character in the picture. Maybe.
Okay. And the colors, that's good too. Black, they're not looking at the camera. You guys are good. Dressing style of the characters in the picture. You're quite right and quite observant that these people are not looking at us, the audience, and it's almost as if they're saying they're better than us. They're too good for us. They don't care about us. They also, we could look at the fabrics here, the lines of clothing. Where does your eye go first? Where is it drawn to next? Usually we look at eyes, but then I think we go down to the woman's décolletage. Also the background here, the swimming pool, the foliage, this might be a private estate or a country club. All of these things I think were very useful. The black and white photography tends to be a more artistic form rather than color, and more unusual since we're used to color photography. And I think finally we should also look at what is not shown here. And so this is not the sort of ad that is shouting at you with today, $29.95, come on down. This rather is a more subtle sort of ad. And so that's also consistent with high-end advertising. So I think the point here, and let me just stop sharing for just a moment and take other questions that you might have, is that we can tell a lot from just looking at an advertisement and what it quote unquote says to us. And you guys, I can tell that you're at a communication school because you're looking at the visual, and if there was auditory, you'd also be listening to tone of voice and so forth. But let me stop there and field any questions that you might have so far on these very quick 4 cases that we've looked at. And then we'll get back to looking at some methods specifically. So I think we have a fresh chat box if you'd like to enter some questions. Dr. Amonga, I think, will give those to us.
So we do have a question. I'm not sure if it relates to the 4 cases that we just spoke about, but this is from Tikaram Vika, and it says, good evening, everyone. I'm from Nepal and currently beginner in research. I am in a very problem to choose the appropriate theory in my research. I want to study on human adaptation to natural hazards. Can you suggest appropriate theories or as well as any techniques to choose appropriate theories? If you wish.
Sorry. Human adaptation to what? Could you say that again?
Natural hazards.
I'm still not hearing that.
Natural hazards, whatever you want to call it.
Natural hazards like pollution, for example. Okay.
Yes.
And so it was very interesting at the start of COVID-19 that there was sort of a natural experiment here where cars stopped going in the city. And if you look at photographs of Delhi's streets normally in December and January, just clogged with smoke, but suddenly you could see things in the city. It had cleared up. And so I don't think people realized as much that the pollution was even there as they did when it was suddenly gone. And you could see the difference. Unfortunately, we can't run that natural experiment every day by telling cars that they cannot drive, but we can observe things that are happening to change the climate, things that are happening to change the way that we talk, things that we just looked at, like the introduction of the phone and electricity to a village that formerly did not have it. In that case, we're fortunate enough to have a before and after to show how people had become adapted. That now I think a smartphone has become a fairly natural thing that people carry with them 24 hours a day. It may be the first thing that they look at in the morning and the last thing they look at in the evening. That people are becoming accustomed to it, but just a short time ago they were not. I think we can do oral history where people talk about when they got their first phone, what that experience was like. We can have them do sort of retrospective, even though we can't go back to that time. We could look at other people on the other end of the messages that are being sent. I don't think people are calling so much anymore, but they're using different apps to communicate with each other. They could text each other or use WhatsApp as common in India. They could also, the avenues that we could investigate, be using things like Flipkart or Amazon to buy things that they didn't buy previously. And we could look at how much of their shopping has changed and gone online. And especially with COVID, that I think that's been an additional incentive not to leave the house. So COVID may still be an advent of a research opportunity because it's changed people's behavior, and they may have adopted patterns that they didn't adopt before. Will they go back as COVID now is lifting pretty much in India, or will these be permanent patterns? I think observing what people are doing now and how that changes perhaps as they go out. We can use some observation. We can also use some retrospective interviewing. And if we do the observation, we can look at adaptations that are taking place to things like the behavior with the phone that people are carrying, or the smartphone perhaps. And we can do that cross-culturally, cross-cutting, different age groups, different genders, and so forth, that may be important as well. I don't know if a practice like weddings has been changed as a result of COVID-19. I don't know exactly what the weddings are like in Pune, but as you know, they're different in the north and the south and so forth. If those in Punjab that used to be multi-day weddings have been compressed into one day, that would be something that could be looked at. This is an intentional adaptation, whereas I think most of the adaptations that we're looking at otherwise are unnoticeable, that they take place without our specific intention to change. And so that might be a variable that is worth looking at, how many of these changes are purposeful versus incidental, something that came along. Or it's rainy season now in Pune. How does that change not just the weather, but people's behavior? Will it change as you get toward the valley and the rain stops? How is that changing behaviors? Now you have other things like the changing month, the changing temperature, and so forth. So that makes that a little bit more complicated to look at, but it nevertheless is something you can look at the moment of change as the rainy season begins or ends. So, use your imagination, but those are just a couple of things that come to mind. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. The next question is, interested in knowing more about sensory class research. Is there a conference paper or so to be read, or any related work? Dr. Preetha wants to add something here, I guess.
Oh, no, Chetna. Sorry.
Okay. It says you want to answer it live. So any suggestions here for sensory class research?
Yeah, we do have a paper that was a conference paper that was presented. Also, my colleagues have published two papers actually based on their laboratory research, which they learned that they had to throw away when they got to the qualitative ethnographic research. But those two papers are in Journal of Consumer Research, and you can find them, or if you can't find them, I'll give you references to them. You can email me, and I'll be happy to respond. But there is a conference paper using the qualitative research that we can send. And I think we'd be happy to share the initial research submission with you as well. I can check with my colleague, Tanuka Ghoshal. And incidentally, it's Ghoshal and Rita Batra is the co-author on the papers in Journal of Consumer Research. So yes, look there, and if everyone has access to the Association for Consumer Research conference proceedings. If you look at those for the last couple of years, I think you'll find a paper. Look for sensory, and hopefully that will be enough to bring it up, or look for our names. Unfortunately, that also looks at citations, so you get a lot of other papers as well. Thank you for the question.
Since there are so many questions here, allow me to cherry pick few, because if time allows, I'll come back to all the questions and try and address them. There is one question by Ria Wadhwani, and she says, does bluffing is only related to the elements for resources or characteristics that the person doesn't own, or it may be by those who actually own it in the name of signaling? So basically bluffing is signaling, or is there any difference between them?
Yeah, I think it becomes signaling when it becomes something that you're comfortable with. If you are not or have not ever roller skated, and you buy a very expensive professional pair of rollerblades, and you start trying them out, you bought something that says, if people can tell by looking, that you're an expert, because these are top of the line, high-end brands. They shouldn't be for a beginner. And if you start using them and you immediately fall down, or you're very clumsy, flailing around with your arms and legs, that's an inappropriate behavior. Doesn't go with the high-end brand. And so you have to be comfortable in it. And I think it's the same, maybe since you've come to university in Pune, if you're from outside of Pune, perhaps your clothing has changed. There's a study in Chennai of men's clothing at university. There's some other studies of clothing in Indian universities that look how it changes when people are farther away from home and are living at a university environment. So I think that's something you also need to be comfortable with. Actually, in one of the studies that was done in Chennai, the ethos was that you should buy fake brands. You should not buy real brands. And so one of the students that normally didn't, they were wearing a Diesel brand clothing, but Diesel was not a brand that had come to India yet. And so one of the men asked, even though he had a t-shirt on that said Diesel, is it a band? Is it a brand? What is it? They didn't even know. And so you have to become comfortable with wearing and doing the bluff, so that it is no longer a bluff. So they're simply signaling who you are. So that's something that takes some time. In the same study, one of the young men's father gave him an actual pair of Adidas sneakers, and he was embarrassed to wear them because they were the real thing. So he hid them under his bed. And when he did have to go out and wear them, he hoped people would think they were fakes, that he didn't want to be accused of wearing the real thing in this case. So sort of reverse snobbery, if you will. They aspired to own the real brands, but not while they were in university. And this is something that they called styling or styling. And so this was something that they were doing. I've heard it referred to that way in other places in India as well. So yeah, that's a quick answer to a good question. Thank you.
So there's one question related to the cases that we just spoke about. So it says in all 4 cases, the classification of culture was done on the basis of class. Isn't the concept of class itself a cultural construct? This is from
Sure
Sakura.
it is. And the ABCD classes that are used in India are not the same as those that are used in North America, for example. But yes, it is a construction. And actually, I was shortcutting it by saying that it's about class. We also looked at cultural capital. And cultural capital has to do with the amount of education you've had, the amount of education that your parents have had, other things of that sort. So it goes beyond just class, and you can change your class. Hypergamy, where you marry someone of a higher social class, is a fairly global sort of practice, and that takes place in India as well. And so if you've changed dramatically your social class, that's a different sort of cultural capital, but it's something that needs to be acquired. We studied some wealthy people in the US one time on an extended family, and they had all become wealthy in the construction trade, and they had different specialties. But one of the women whose husband had become wealthy started to buy some fur coats. And her daughters saw her full-length red fox, not her daughters, her sisters saw her full-length fox fur coat and said, "Darling, that's not a beginner fur coat. You should save that for your fourth or fifth coat, but you should go with the fundamentals first." And so she began to keep a file of furs and diamonds and jewels that she should aspire to have in order to be a proper upper class woman. She was learning this class, and it's like learning a new place. We're learning how to behave appropriately. So class is not fixed, and cultural capital is a concept that encompasses more than just class. So thank you.
So we'll take just one last question, and extension of what we just have been talking about. So the brand Patanjali, I think it is very it has been a disruptive brand, and especially in the FMCG sector, where it cut across different social and economic classifications, different types of consumers, and within the same market. So one could be price point, another is probably nationalism that they appeal to. So how risky it is for a brand to appeal to same sort of target audience from a communication perspective? And can we take Patanjali as an exception, or is this a way to go about it, especially in the FMCG sector?
I'm understanding the brand and brand positioning, but what was the conflict in this question?
So this brand Patanjali actually appealed to different classes, and it was irrespective of the social and economic status of the consumer. So it was something which disrupted the market, and the players which have existed in the market for ages were in trouble, and actually they had to come up with strategies to deal with what this new brand was doing. So in maybe last 7 to 10 years, it has completely changed the way FMCG works.
Okay, I'm not familiar with the particular brand involved here, but if you take something like Ayurvedic brands that some of the gurus in India, like Baba Ramdev, have promoted, these are things that disrupted the market and disrupted all of the brands that had been there for some time. And so what Unilever brands and Procter & Gamble brands had to do was to have Ayurvedic products that were part of their product line. And so they began to incorporate some traditional Indian medicine claims in some of their brands. That was hard to appropriate for these global brands, I think. And you're probably more familiar with the communication strategies that they used to do that and how successful they were. And so disruptive brands that come in, like Gillette's Guard, when it first came in, was disrupting at least the earlier technologies and some of the competing brands from China and elsewhere in the market. And so this is both an opportunity and a difficult thing. I think in disrupting the Ayurvedic brands, it was more of a challenge because these are very traditional Indian things that some people believe in very strongly, and other people think that, well, at least, there's something good there that can help me and benefit me that we shouldn't discount. these things. And so I think that gets to cultural values and to cultural symbols. And that's something that makes it particularly interesting, but particularly challenging to work with. And so I would certainly do some research before bringing out the new products and the new communications to go along with those. So
thank you. Actually, I was talking about Ramdev's brand. So yes, I just gave you the name. So you got it right.
Okay, perfect. So I guess we'll get back to the presentation now. And I believe that this is where we were at. And so if we go on, I guess I was going to mention, years ago, I used this stimulus rather than that stimulus. You can see there's sort of more old-fashioned brands. And this is an ad for a clothing store in San Francisco that is called Nicole Dante. And it was on Geary Street, and we don't have much more to go on. But it's a clothing store, and most people got immediately just as you did. This is a high-end brand. There's some similarities here. These people are dressed in an elegant way. They're not smiling. If you're cool, you would never smile. You might smirk. And they're in black and white, sort of severe looks, looking away from us, elegant clothing. And again, I got the same sorts of thing. This is high end, and they give me some brand name of clothing. But as I showed them the brand name, which was on there as well, one woman said, I think this is about sadism and masochism, bondage and discipline, S&M. And I said, well, you know, sometimes with a projective stimulus, you can tell more about the person than you can the stimulus. But she said, no, don't you see Dante's Inferno? This is hell, this is devilish. And so she was drawing on something that I hadn't picked up on that was there. But other people would look at the type style, the name and so forth. She got the Dante part of it. So moving on. These are two ads that we used in a study in China. We were in Shenzhen, just across the border from Hong Kong. And they happened to have the same layout. We showed people lots of ads for different products, both television ads and print ads. And these ads had pretty much the same layout, visual on the right, some data on the left, data in the left-hand case for the National Razor from Japan having to do with characteristics of the models. In the right-hand one, this is Philips Shave from the Netherlands, but it was advertising the stores where they could find the product where it was sold. And everyone said, well, I like the ad on the right, not so much the one on the left. And at the same time, they said, but you could never show this ad using Chinese people. Chinese people, do not behave this way in public. And so you can show these Europeans, these Anglo people, but you could never show, in that case, Chinese people doing this. And I think the same might be said for Indian people kissing in public this way. And so this is interesting. Japan does the same thing. If they have a magazine article or an online article about something that's about sex or romance, they would show Western models because, of course, Japanese people could never behave in this fashion, or that's the fiction. And so it's an interesting cultural thing that came up that we weren't anticipating that came up from these two ads. So what we're beginning to look at now is techniques. How do we actually go about data? And so we're looking at, in the last couple of cases, projection and interpretations of stimuli. We'll come back to a few more. But first, I'd like to look at Netanography, which my former colleague, Rob Kosnitz, has created and has a series of books on. And he says that Netanography is a combination of network and ethnography, or if you like, internet and ethnography. And it's a qualitative data research technique online. You go to where people are. You try to find communities of people who are talking about the particular product or service category that you're interested in. And technology makes this sort of ethnography more cost-effective, less painstaking, because you're automatically logging into this material. It's more natural, it's less time-consuming. You don't have to go to all of these places. And actually, due to COVID-19, we were doing the sensory research, and we were doing it in several Indian cities. But in this case, we were in New York and Toronto, respectively. And so we had to begin doing it online. And so we did the Dress Lakshmi by having various slides that we would show people of different clothing. Would you wear this? Would you wear this? What do you think of this? And so forth. And it worked out pretty well. We couldn't taste the tea and do various things, but we could do these other things. Using ethnography, and in that case, using a ethnographic depth interview online. We also wanted them to show us their clothing so they could use their smartphones and hold it up to their wardrobes or closets and actually haul out clothing and show it to us, so they could snap a photo and send it to us. So we're able here to observe the past. I'll show you, I guess I won't have time, but I'll show you some examples. We could look at paintings, we could look at photographs, we could look at even cave paintings to learn about the past. In this case, brand community, there's a nice study in Journal of Marketing studying brand communities for Apple Newton, which was an old predecessor of the data collection devices that we use on a tablet or a voice-controlled device. And I'll get back to some further examples there. And these other communities, 3Com, Audrey, Garmin, and so forth. A combination of online monitoring and participant observation, because we try to get some of these people offline to talk to them further. This was a study, and this is in a book that we did on qualitative research that you can see at the bottom there. But this was an example of big data collecting and monitoring online using natural language processing, what people were saying in June 2011 about watches. And these were the brands, and we thought that this would be a good time to do it because Father's Day in North America is in June, and also it's a graduation day for universities and secondary schools. And so watches might be a gift that people would receive. And so the size of these looks at the number of conversations. So Rolex had a lot. The higher they were toward the top, the more favorable the comments, the lower they were, the less favorable. And the farther to the right, the more intense the passions, the farther to the left, the less intense. So people didn't feel very intensely about Timex, and they also thought poorly of it. They thought very highly of Swatch, and they loved it. So what we would do, actually, a natural language processing can only go so far. So if someone says, sorry, this is ridiculously, outrageously awesome, NLP can't really handle that very well. So we need to look at, do some hand coding of what's going on here and maybe some further segmentation. But it's, the process is to try to tie big data and ethnography together, so quantitative and qualitative. And so in this case, we look at the comments. And so these were the comments about swatches put into categories. And good quality, great quality was a common category here, and that was broken out into further detailed categories. And then we would look at the detailed comments. And so these were some of the favorable comments. We would do the same for the unfavorable comments as well, and begin to look at those in greater detail. And so ethnography has some advantages and some disadvantages. You can get a large sample very quickly. You can do immediate analysis. It's considerably cheaper. You don't have to type up transcripts because you've got these records of online archives of material. Sensitive topics are accessible because people are anonymous, usually. Historic archives can be available, not necessarily online, but other types of archives. And it gets around low survey responsiveness these days. At the same time, there's some disadvantages in terms of validating the identity of people. Are they really male? Are they really this age that they're pretending to be or not? You lose the nonverbals, you lose the intangibles like silence and tone of voice. Emoticons can compensate to some degree, but not totally. These are signals, if you will, rather than subtle communication strategies. And there's a question about the reliability and integrity of the information. And if you're actually there looking at people as they go online, that can cause some distortions because you're being observed. And you can get so much information here, you wind up with information overload, too much. So here's another big data technique that we could begin with. This is looking at books that have been written, and you can search for various words. And so in anticipation of this article that you can see at the upper right, we were interested in how the terms enchantment and disenchantment were being used over this period of 150 years. And so as you can see, enchantment began to decline and disenchantment began to rise and stayed pretty much even with enchantment into the 2000s. And so we developed, as the title of this article shows, the notion of disenchanted enchantment, sort of ironic disenchantment, that we don't really expect the hype for the next smartphone to be true, but we're still buying into it. We're being skeptical, but yet we're going along with it. Here's another thing you can do. This is Google Trends. And this was looking at the past 12 months in India. And these were not the most commonly searched terms, but I just put in these terms: Olympics, cricket, COVID, secondary school leaving certificate, and Australia. And as you can see, back in early December, I think that was, of 2020, there must have been something with Australia. And I think that was a 5-day test match, something of that sort. And I think India won, incidentally. You can see that cricket picked up throughout this at various points. And until the Olympics, and that's the blue line at the right, going up, any interest in Olympics sort of peaked after the opening ceremony and of course declined. And at the same time, this green line shows that SSLC searches were picking up toward the end of this period. Now, we can look in greater detail. This is just looking at the past 7 days. And this is also in India for the same 5 terms. And you can see just where the Olympics searches peaked. And you can also see where the SSLC terms peaked in this case. And you could go on and see where those are commonly taking place. And Karnataka, of course, was the one looking at SSLC because they were announcing them on this particular day. I think it was the 9th of August. And you can see the amount of interest in Olympics in different parts of India. We could drill down further. These were some of the 25 different searches that were on the top here, searches for different people in the Olympics and taking place in different parts of India as well. So this is a handy thing for drilling down fairly quickly, and then we could go in and talk to people about what they're getting out of these searches, bringing again the big data together with the little data. This is a technique that we use for a study in the start of a study in Pakistan. The software is called Leximancer, and this was a study of conspicuous religiosity. Did people display symbols of their religion on their automobiles, on their homes exterior, on their homes interior, on their bodies? And so we did some research. We put all the data, observational and interview together. And then we just did a quick cut by throwing it into Leximancer, and it grouped things together. And so, whoops, sorry if I can get back to that. So we found 3 clusters here, one of things, prayer things, one of prayer itself, and one of the prophet, PBUH is peace be upon him, as you may know. So you can see that these clusters overlap, but this gave us some idea of what people were beginning to talk about so that we could delve in greater detail, or we could pull out one of these folders and look at the material that's in it in greater detail. So going on, this is from a study that we did of videography, and this, I think, is the most authors I've ever been with on a paper. There were 7 of us in this case from different parts of US, Australia. Just looking quickly, I guess there's no one in India in this case. US, Canada, Australia were the primary countries. But not to be outdone, there was a study that was at the CERN nuclear accelerator, and it involved something like 400 co-authors of people that have been involved in this technology. So 7 perhaps is not too many. At any rate, looking quickly at some of these technologies, here's a technology that is called, in this case, we're just looking at a YouTube clip. It's a study for MoneyGram, which is sort of like Western Union to send money. There are others of this if you're repatriating money from the Middle East, for example. And so this woman has a video blog, and let me just let you listen to her for a while.
Thank you everybody for tuning in again to the Arena Express this bright Tuesday morning. I appreciate all your likes, your comments, all your feedback. Today I am going to be talking about ungrateful family members, demanding family members, direct brothers, mothers, fathers, and uncles. This one is not about friends. This is about direct family members. So, we all are over here, we are struggling, we are working very hard. Some of us, our parents spend different kind of monies, they put their hands into so many different places to get us over here. But that is not enough for them to kill us in stress. Heaven knows we are trying. First of all, if you have any family member who is too demanding, and no matter how much you try, they only want to kill you, they want to press you, they need money today, they need money tomorrow, they need money another day, tag them with this video. I know some of you are so scared, you cannot talk about it. Tag them with this video. At least you are not the one who said it. It was just a random video that you found online and you tag them with it. However, I want to address you people who are back home. Please learn when to call people who are overseas. No matter the country they are. Before you want to call our numbers, look at your time. The way that people treat some of us is just like we are slaves or something. 3 a.m., someone is sleeping. Their phone is ringing. Hello, hello, hello. Is this Sister Honorine? Yes. Vita, what is it? Oh, Sister Honorine, please call me back, I don't have credit. You don't have credit. You are calling me too, you don't have credit. Besides, you called me at 2 a.m. I would think that it's an emergency. I will call Vita. Vita, what is it? Sister Honorine, I just wanted to tell you that I don't have money for this. I don't have money for that. Please send me the money quick.
Okay, you can tell from looking at her, she's not a happy camper. And so this is an interesting video that they found that people that were sending money back home were not very happy about it, that they were annoyed by the people constantly asking them for more money. And so they developed a campaign for MoneyGram that made heroes and heroines out of these people that were sending money back home and looking at the help that it did. And so it was looking at this in a more favorable light. Sorry.
Thank you everybody for tuning in again.
Quiet. Video is something that has become important. And furthermore, you can see lots of videos that are about consumption, like Super Size Me, or corporations like the New Corporation. There was an earlier version of that, or about the environment, or Trump, or Modi, and so forth. And so consumers have become a hot topic in the social sciences and humanities. Our heroes of fools and villains have come from consumers and corporations. And not only is consumption rising, but so is videography. Consumer researchers are becoming image makers, and it becomes easier and cheaper to do that. So that Van Ness said in 2005, is cinema studies the new MBA, because you can control the minds and hearts of people with video. And so this is a film, Tangerine, that was at the documentary film festival, Sundance Film Festival, and won a prize. It was shot entirely on an iPhone 5S with a supplemental lens and an $8 app called Filmic Pro. So anyone with a smartphone has a television studio, a video studio. They also have the editing with iMovie, or you can have, if it's an iPhone, or you can have the other equivalent using other devices. We started a film festival at the Association for Consumer Research, and I won't go through these in detail, but they're from different places like China, the US, Mexico, Qatar, Germany, Brazil, Italy, Pakistan, different places. And so this has become a great medium. So the film festival takes place. These are from posters that people put up to attract people to their films to get the audience preference award. If we're looking at techniques, smartphones have taken over India, 58% of those now over 18, and phones in general, 91% of those over 14. There's implications for online buying, for doing interviews online, and you can do as we do, have people snap photos for you. This is from an old study that we did, Kelly Tian and I guess I didn't put in the full reference, but it was at a company that was transmitting secure bank data. And we were looking at office place possessions. And so this was years ago, and we had people use their 12 exposure disposable cameras to take photos of their possessions. And then we came back and interviewed them offline at a nearby cafe. And the top one was a man, he was working long hours because he was hoping the company was going to be bought out. They would have an IPO or a direct buy, and they would all become rich. And so these were literally his dream boats in the background that he posted to keep himself motivated. This is what he was working for. In the bottom, I don't know if you know these breath mint Pez containers. They have little heads on the top. One woman had a few in her office and started to become a topic of conversation. Other people brought in other Pez containers for the collection, and it became a place of office place humor, which often works as a positive motivating factor in the factory. Now today we could do that by having people snap photos of where they are at the restaurant that they're at, for example, and email them to us so we could send them further instructions, snap pictures of the waiter or waitress when she comes and so forth. So we can do online interactive photography and videography. There's a couple of people I know that have an ethnographic consulting company called Practica in New York and Chicago, and they wanted to study university students' weekend drinking behaviors in North America. And they could go along with them, but they would sort of be awkward fifth wheels. So they sent them to videotape themselves. And what they learned was that early in the evening, these people bought expensive, good quality beers. Later in the evening, they bought the cheapest thing because they were so drunk they knew they wouldn't appreciate it. So this was a finding they wouldn't have come up with otherwise without this technique. So what I'll get into now is projectives, and I'll come back to why this speech bubble is coming from the pig. But all of these are sort of ambiguous stimuli posed to get people to talk about it. So this is an office place, and you would have people tell stories about a series of visuals like this. And then you can apply a well-developed coding manual. The people are asked the questions on the left, talk about what's happening, what's being thought, and so forth. And then you apply coding manuals like those on the right. This particular one measures need achievement. So is there need achievement? Maybe there's competition, maybe there's a unique achievement, maybe there's long-term involvement, or is it doubtful or totally unrelated imagery? And then points for different things. I'm sorry, I'm skipping through things here. So that's how we would get the stories and how we would go about interpreting them. So this is qualitative input, the stories, but quantitative output, getting a score that's numeric, and you add it up across the stories that people have told. So to go on, here's some cartoon tests. The ones on the top ask a little bit different questions than the ones on the bottom, but they're about gift giving, they're about socializing in a drink setting, and they're about word of mouth. Would you tell your hairdresser? Would you tell your schoolmate? And so forth. I spent a year in Zimbabwe, and I was at a university with Anglophone and Francophone and Lusophone. There's English, French, and Portuguese speakers. And the idea was they would all get together and go back to their home countries and still be friends. But it didn't work out that way. And so we were studying what the different groups saw of each other. So this is sorry, this is going on its own accord. This is a stereotypical English woman on the left, a stereotypical French woman on the right, and we have each of them fill in the thought bubble about that woman. This is just a mix and match, choose which woman goes with which drink. The one you may not be familiar with here is opaque beer. It's a low price beer that comes in a big brown container that you stereotypically stand around street corners drinking and passing around to one another. So drawing lines in this case was all that was needed. Here's another, if Donald Trump were a dog, he would be. And I think you get a very visual portrait very quickly. If Narendra Modi was an animal, he would be. And again, you get an image fairly quickly. I don't know if you have this product, Black Flag Roach Motel, sold in North America. And it was sold, target market was young female homemakers, but it wasn't selling very well. And so the idea is that you set up this little motel. It's got yellow roof and walls, and the roaches smell something good in it, and they crawl in, and there's poison, and they don't come out. They die. And so their slogan was, the roaches check in, but they don't check out. So they had these women that were not buying it come in to McCann Erickson ad agency, it's an old study, draw pictures and tell stories about roaches. And it turned out, I won't go through these in detail, but the roaches to these women represented all of the men who had ever done them wrong in their life. And so they talked about later, what they really liked was spraying the cockroach and watching it writhe on its back and eventually die. And they got none of that vicarious pleasure when it simply disappeared into the roach motel. So this is something people would not even acknowledge to themselves, perhaps, but this was something that came through from the projective technique. I had a doctoral student, Hilary Leonard, and she was studying honeymoons, and you can't really go on people's honeymoons with them. So she had people do their honeymoon fantasy, their dream honeymoon, and then their nightmare honeymoon. And these are just two examples from a woman on the left and a man on the right. And you can see that the woman had couples doing fun things on their honeymoon. On the other hand, the man had natural settings and nude or semi-nude women. And of course, bass fishing, because you probably want to go bass fishing on your honeymoon. So very different ideologies of the dream honeymoons. The nightmare honeymoons were also quite different. Here are two examples. The man felt tied down, that his bride wouldn't be what he expected her to be. The woman on the right was afraid that his ex-girlfriends would come back and fight with her, that she would become trailer trash, that he would go out drinking with the boys and so forth. What you do in these cases is have people do the collage, and then you hadn't told them in advance, but you have them interpret it to you to talk about it, why they chose these images afterwards. Now, nowadays, we can do that, of course, online. You can just have a person use your phone or tablet and draw some images by just searching for images online. And you could have them do a collage by dragging and dropping these images that they've captured to represent travel, for example. And when I do this with travel, what I typically get is two types of travel imagery. Some is travel for holiday, and some is travel for work. And so on probing people further, you begin to sort out those two. Word association. These are two corporations I think you're familiar with, McDonald's. In-N-Out Burgers is a California chain that is rather beloved. And so this is In-N-Out Burgers on the top. I'm sorry, on the top, yeah. And McDonald's on the bottom. So you can see fairly quickly good and bad food images respectively. Here are two that were for Canada versus America. And you can see that Canada wins the hearts of people to a much greater degree. You could even do which cup best represents your department. Is it delicate and formal? Is it funny and informal? Is it strong? Is it powerful? Is it quote unquote girlish and so forth? So all of these projective techniques are indirect rather than direct. They're more right brain, if you will, rather than left hemisphere. The data is more symbolic, metaphoric, and aesthetic. It's more playful, creative, and fun. And so bring it into your interview. Have this break up the interview and be fun. And you're also doing it on this tablet so that rather than looking eye to eye with this person, you're both looking at this other thing that you brought in. And that's much more freeing and people are much less inhibited. They don't give you a socially desirable set of responses. So this is, I would say, especially relevant to communications as well as product design, brand positioning. It's also good for idea and theory generation. So try these projective methods if you haven't. And I said I'd come back to why the thought bubble, speech bubble is coming out of the pig. This is my old dog, Zelda. And John Sherry was at Northwestern University when he did this study, and he had people study dog food. His students actually had some samples of dog food. They would go out and interview dog food owners, and they would come back and write up the transcripts of their interviews. And he looked at them and he said, well, what did the dogs have to say? And they said, well, dogs can't talk. So he sent them back out with more dog food samples to interview the dogs. And so they would put down some food in the dog bowl, and the dog would come over and sniff it or eat it. And they would hold down their recorder by the dog food and say, so what do you think of this dog food? And the owner would be over in another part of the room with their hands folded, and they would pantomime or they would ventriloquize, I love my kibbles and bits. And so they were in effect using the live animal, their pet, as a projective measure in this case, a kind of clever one. So I'll end with this study of servant, friend, or master, we called it. This was done in Switzerland, and we had people look at Alexa, Siri, other techniques. In this case, they were just looking at Google Assistant and Apple Siri on their smartphones. Those were the genders. It was only Apple Siri that had a mixed male-female gender. The others were perceived as female because those are the voice, the alternative voices that are automatically there. So the effects of this Internet of Technology, well, it could be a great boon. It gives access to people who are literate because you can just speak it rather than have to type it in. It's personal. Supposedly in the first year after Alexa was introduced, 500,000 people told her that they loved her, and 250,000 asked her to marry them. And Amazon knows this because they're always listening for the wake word, which means they're listening to everything that you're saying within earshot, which opens up the problems of big data, market analytics, and surveillance in this case. But it's also a treasure trove of data to be able to draw upon. But in this study, we were having people go through a series of tasks, and we give them different tasks each day. They would keep records of how they were responding each day, how they were getting along with these voice commands. They were only to use their voice. They couldn't use the keyboard at all. And we had them, again, give different tasks each day, countdowns, product comparisons, and so forth. And then we also interviewed them at the end of this. And we were able to, this was sort of the procedure that we followed. We did some screening beforehand. We did a preliminary questionnaire that they filled out. And then we had them do this task. And this was part of what they responded by on the right. And then in the personal interview, we got into more depth, looking at anthropomorphization, opinions, and so forth. And we were able to group them into 3 groups, as the title suggested: servant, friend, and master. I'll just read one of these in each case. This was the servant. She clearly is a servant. When I ask a question, she answers, and she does exactly then when I command it. So treating it as a servant, treating it as a partner, mostly it's like a good friend whom I can ask anything. And feeling that you are the servant, that this thing is the master. When I sometimes say something, she replies, I don't understand you, 15 times, and gives me wrong answers when she understands me, and that I feel like a servant who has to rely on her. And so these different groups of people came out. The servant was about equal to the partner and master in terms of how often they were in these categories. So if these millennial university students have trouble mastering the digital assistant, no doubt others will have even more trouble. And they, at the same time, provide a wealth of data if we can overcome these problems. So I will thank you there. And I don't know, but perhaps we'll have still a few minutes for questions.
So if you allow me, I'd like to revisit some questions that were really interesting, but I have to stop at that point in time.
Okay, please.
So we have this question from Professor Giridhar Ramchandran from XLRI, and he says, I'm Giri here, faculty at XLRI, interested in understanding how do we seek out the existence of appropriate theory to explain some phenomenon. For example, if I have to look at something like YouTube video, appeals and reasons for large subscriptions.
Well, what we're arguing, and hi to you, I think I recognize your name, that if we're using what we're calling abductive logic rather than inductive logic that you might use in trying to just interpret something based on what you know, or deductive logic where you're beginning with a theory and you're deducing premises and hypotheses from it. In abductive reasoning, we're looking at something and we're trying to find puzzles and curiosities and anomalies, things that don't quite make sense. And then we're just trying to understand those things that we can't really account for, that they strike us as unusual. And what we're doing in this case is trying to come up with something just as Newell did in looking at these behaviors in the Gobi that were taking place. And what he was able to come up with was an analogy to the dances that men did when they came back from the forest, when they came back from initiation. So what you're drawing upon in this case is not prior theories, but it's everything that you can think of that might apply here. And this is sort of the left brain thinking, if you will. It's letting all of your thoughts come out about what might be some possible interpretations here and not critically looking at it. You could do that individually or you could do it in a group. It's a common brainstorming technique. There might be some theoretical interpretations that come out as a part of that, but you're trying to go beyond existing theories and generate some fresh ideas. So I don't have time to go into it in detail, I'm afraid, but I think if you look at that paper, you'll find some suggestions of when that can be done. And I'm pretty sure that's one of those that I sent that should be available to you. So hi to you, good to see you, and thanks for the questions, even though I can't see you.
Professor Chetna, if you don't mind, I have a question too.
Please.
To Professor Belk. So while you were talking about projective techniques and how we can take it online today, I still got a sense that it, while you take a tablet or while you take an online device, there is some sort of physical element to it that you are, as a researcher, taking this device. Can it be self-administered, in a way that the respondent does it on their own? Is that done at all?
It could be. I mean, it's hard to get greater depth that way, but if you're asking open-ended questions, I think people who are thoughtful and are responding. I've just ordered an electric automobile, a Tesla, for example. And so, of course, I'm trying to reduce my cognitive dissonance by looking at Tesla videos online now. And people are so proud and happy of their cars, about their cars, that they respond with comments, they respond with their own homemade videos, or perhaps they're trying to develop a channel on YouTube themselves. And if you get a topic that people are really, really interested in like that, I think that you'll get good data by just asking some open-ended questions on a device or some place that they can go and respond themselves. But ideally, I think that you can follow up avenues that come up that have been interesting that the person might not thought of as going into detail about, but it was just an incidental thing. And so if you were talking about a meal, for example, and they bring up something that you're not familiar with in the meal, you said, well, wait a minute, a little while ago you talked about so-and-so, could we go back and talk about that? And so when we took our research on the sensory preferences online, we were just like this, using Zoom with people. And we actually hired an interviewer. We were doing some of these in local dialects. And so where it was in Hindi or where it was in English, we could come in afterwards, or in Bengali, which is another language that my Tanuka Ghoshal spoke. we could query people, and we could ask them to show us different things, and we could go back once more to something that they talked about, but not in sufficient depth. And so I think that interactivity is a great advantage. On the other hand, if you give people a series of tasks like we did with the digital assistants, they can do them at their leisure. They can do them when they have some time to spend versus the time that you happen to catch them. So there's some advantages, but there's also some disadvantage to having a packaged series of tasks or questions for people.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
So I'll just take two more questions, and I'll just run them through them quickly. So this is from an anonymous attendee. Would you suggest combining natural language processing with ethnography? Do we have more examples of qualitative researchers who've done this? I saw a few papers from analytics people, and it did not seem great.
Yeah, I think it's people tend to qualify to categorize themselves as being qualitative people or quantitative people, and never the twain shall meet. But I think we do get, as I mentioned, Tanuka Ghoshal and Rishti Batra began doing laboratory studies of sensory preferences, and then we began to do the qualitative research. And their eyes were opened. And Tanuka has switched camps from being a quantitative researcher to being a qualitative researcher, and going to the consumer culture theory conferences and so forth. But I think anyone, if they have an open enough mind, can employ different sets of techniques. And I think ideally you should have both, that we should have a big toolkit so that we can apply the right tool for the right problem when it comes up. Otherwise, I think you've probably heard of the only tool in your toolkit is a hammer. You keep hammering away regardless of the nature of the problem. There's no nail involved at all. And so combining techniques, I think, can be useful. Oftentimes we do, as we did with the study in Switzerland with the smart devices, is do a questionnaire first, and then follow up with the series of tasks and diaries and depth interviews at the end of this. And so I think there you're combining getting the quantitative data of what people are, this is almost like self-quantification to get what people are doing with their smart devices each day, and how they're performing with these tasks and their thoughts about it. And then coming in at the end where we can probe and go into detail on certain aspects that we were interested in. So by all means, have a big toolkit, throw in projective techniques, do observations, try to shop along with people if that's appropriate, and maybe you'll find a use for questionnaire data as well, even experiments, natural experiments ideally in some cases. Thank you for the question, anonymous attendee.
And the last question is from my colleague, Professor Shashi Kiran. He is with us at Flame University. He thanks you for the interesting talk and is referring to your book, which is Collecting Consumer Society. I'll just read out what he's written. So these are references to the Frankfurt School of Cultural Studies, Walter Benjamin's work, Freud, Marx, commodity fetishism theory, which leaves the reader with well-rounded perspective on consumer society. But of late, I sense a discomfort and reluctance to engage with cultural studies or critical theory, especially in a business school context, possibly due to ideological nature of such theory. Wanted to know your perspective on this as a scholar who has engaged with both these areas in depth. And if time allows, kindly comment on the theoretical importance of such historical research in consumer culture theory.
That's a great question, and it's a problem that comes up here as well, that typically a group of legislators, politicians, look at universities and look at the fact that the faculty are only teaching 6 or 9 hours a week, and they're used to a 40-hour, 60-hour week. What are we paying these people for? And so we should have them do less research and certainly less frivolous qualitative research or cultural studies, and especially critical theory. What is that doing in a business school? And so if they begin to look at the publications in detail and find cultural studies that has critical rather than applied sorts of implications. It's almost like this is a terrible hex taboo discovery. And so they react defensively. I think what we have to do is education. And what CCT researchers have done is, I think, go overboard in having applied sort of studies so they can demonstrate that, yes, we can get some theoretical interpretations out of this, but there are qualitative insights that we can derive as well. So we use something like Holt's looking at sort of a Latourian cultural theory that they're applying, but they're also coming up with some implications for market segmentation and lifestyle analysis and so forth. So it's sort of having something, and in the UK, this is something that also comes up because you've got to show the practical implications of your research and how you've sort of announced your research to a broader audience, to regular people, so that you have some YouTube clips, for example, or you have some articles in local magazines and so forth as well. I think one thing we could argue as a department is we need to have a well-rounded department. And this is an important part of communication studies, that we would be a totally inadequate department if we didn't have critical cultural studies as a part of it. So yes, we have that as a part of it, but look at, we also have these people who are doing this type of research, and look at all of these very practical studies that have been published as a result of that. So it's sort of like telling the individual researcher that you should have a broad toolkit. In this case, we're trying to sell that we're a broad department, that we're not just doing critical studies and Marxian research, God forbid, but we're also doing these studies that have very applied implications. And we've got 3 courses in typography, for example, and that's a pretty applied sort of thing. It's hard to do critical studies of typography, but yeah, probably it could be done. And so it's selling that we're trying to not be all things to all people, but we're a well-rounded department, and we need these things to be respected in university studies and to get government grants and so forth. We need all of this. So hopefully that will fly. Thank you for the question.
I'm happy to let you know, Professor Belk, that here at Flame School of Communication, we do exactly this. We have both, critical studies scholars as well as people who are working with business research. So, both the theorizing as well as the practical implications are taken care of, I hope. And over a period of time, it will be visible to all in more direct ways.
I'm sure it will. And when they look at citation studies and so forth, they'll find evidence of that. So good. Thank you all for the questions very much. I've enjoyed being here.
Thank you, sir. In fact, I think it's we've already exceeded time by 12 minutes, but I would really like to thank you for such an insightful and engaging session. My personal favorite was the dog interviews where, you could use them. So I think another extension of that business is that now you have applications where you can identify, what your dog is or your pet is saying, and it's based on the machine learning and artificial intelligence. So thank you so much for your time and so insightful conversation. I would really like to thank the interactive audience here. Your questions made the learning really interesting. My apologies to Ms. Pushpa, Ms. Amrita from MICA for skipping the questions here, but I hope we find a way to get back to you with those, the answers. And Mr. Bala Subramaniam, thank you for sharing. I think he added one of the literature piece for the questions about the natural hazards. So thank you so much for that. My special thanks to our VC, Dr. Tishan Kamdar, and our Associate Dean, Dr. Sajid Narayan, who without their support, I don't think this would have been possible. And a special thanks to my IT and marketing team who made this possible in the, this online version and made it such a smooth experience for everyone. So thank you so much, everyone, for taking this time out and joining us. And we really look forward to this attendance for the upcoming sessions in the series as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah, Professor Chetna, if I take a minute,
Please.
you know, while we started the session, I said that this was largely for, you know, to raise the bar for Indian scholars. But from the attendance list, I see that Professor Belk has managed to get an international audience here. Very, very happy to see that we are able to, you know, reach out to a larger audience than that, what we hope to begin with. And going forward with the series, I hope that, you know, we create this research community that's larger than what we had envisioned and is far more impactful than what we thought. I just want to also, you know, kind of bring in here that our next talk is in this series, in the International Research Seminar series, is by Professor Stefano Pontoni. And he will be talking on the 27th of August at 6 p.m., just like today, Indian time. And the topic is technology and consumer research. It's just so that you can look out for our updates on this, you know, going forward. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you very much. I'll be glad to field any questions by email if you have them. And when we were chatting yesterday, I forgot to mention that there's a CCT group that's been started out of IIM Udaipur. And so you might try to, yeah, you're familiar with it, Professor Monga. So that's a group that I think is interesting to tie into as well in India. So thank you. I'll leave it with that advertisement.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.